Right. So the thing is, this week was just the picker for CJ Play, or the kind of notes application side of things. So you can see really all I did is I removed some old code here for just like testing purposes, and then added in this picker, and then now I have this extra picker here. And then I also had to change this hard coding because the picker is now there. So that was pretty much all that I had to do. The only other thing here is defining this mode self.state.mode. So if we go into the state, then let's see. Now there's this case switch statement. Maybe if it'll open the code review again. There you can see these are kind of the new things here. So now we have this mode, we have the stream and dev, and then that gets enumerated and printed out to the screen. And then this tells us which API path we want to use. So that's all that was done there. In the podcast, it's much more significant changes. So we have a little bit of a new structure here. Mainly the outer stuff, like the overall application state, is here in podcast state. Nothing really else has changed. And then also we have now these extensions, which is some stuff for strings to encode URLs properly, if it has a space in it kind of a thing, or remove HTML from the JSON response that I get from the API. And then networking helpers is kind of this thing where at least it lets me download this image kind of cleanly, and I can just call this. I don't know if this is the right way to do things. I think I'll explore it a little bit more in a second here. The next thing is we have now like this persistent layer, and this is the core data. So yeah, this is mostly just here. This is just like fetching stuff, and then here is mostly returning like a local podcast kind of a thing into the local application state, or we're gonna get a podcast and turn it into a core data object, and then ultimately this should probably be a to-do to context save or something here. Because we should have the managed object context in this podcast layer, but really this should be in the lightweight layer. We need kind of a persistence layer and to manage this a little bit more cleanly. Because you can see that the code kind of blows up everywhere if you don't. Similar for episodes, we do something very similar. And it's just a few different getters for our fetch requests for convenience sake. Next is the actual models. So now one thing that I'm doing instead is we're conforming to the decodable protocol. So now when we get the JSON response, we can kind of just instantiate a JSON decoder and decode it through our structures here. So this is quite nice. So at least I have these coding keys. This would actually get coded itself just fine. But now in the podcast, we'll see that, okay, we have all these keys, all these things are going to get set. And then, yeah, this is initializing from a persistent podcast for UI stuff. But this works very beautifully and kind of cleans up a significant part of the code. Like basically, so I have a lot of hanging code here that I will need to delete. Like all this update episodes, update all of this is going to go away. But you can see all this manual JSON decoding here. This is all removed now. So that's quite nice. We'll just delete that because we really don't need it. There are some more things that we'll cover here in a second that are leading to the bugs. So I'll describe them once I get there. So similarly, we do the same thing for episodes. No problem. Everything works kind of just fine. The only thing that we have is we need to parse the date properly here. So that's fine. Internal stuff is just like raw JSON that I got from the response, so I don't have to hit the API as much. This is mostly for my own internal testing. I think this is something that I definitely need to integrate, but I haven't done yet. At some point it will come in. Not having it is kind of a problem. So after that, then we have um, our actual views. So most of the stuff actually is kind of done on the UI or asynchronously from the UI. So to begin with, our content view is this overall view. We did have one small modification in this to have the now playing view at the bottom, not inside of the navigation view. You can see the navigation views here. So that's really all that was there. And then everything really starts from the search view. We do a lot in the search view. Um, it's kind of initially where you get a lot of information and where all the information stays. So this is mainly where I want to be manipulating the core data for adding new podcasts in. And I think we'll probably rename things or refactor things a little bit to make that clear. So now the only thing is when we actually do the search. Previously, this was quite different. Let me see if I can. I'm still new to all this stuff. Let me do this. Let me see if I can open the code review. It doesn't like it. That's fine. What if I show the commit? It's everything. Does it show me the diff? Oh, it shows me the diff. Beautiful. Oh, I'll just work like this then. Yeah, sorry, I'm still learning Xcode very much. So now let's go back into our search view. Oh, it doesn't show a diff. Well, that's useless. Okay, that's fine. So at least in the search view, yeah, mainly the thing is we'll do this search query and this will populate in our state, and then our UI will get updated when the state updates. Um, Initially, what I wanted to do here is actually nest a bunch of objects in the state and use that to update everything in the UI. Turns out you can't do that with classes. You can only do it with structs. And then structs, you can't pass them by reference. I think they're only passed by value, so that's not quite ideal for how I would want to structure the application. So now I'm doing mostly things in the persistence layer, and I don't know if this is something that I'll continue in the future. But now when the search gets called, we were able to remove a bunch of other code. And fortunately, we just do our URL session data task here. And we go and say, okay, let's get the results from the decoded response from the JSON, right? The JSON decoded response. Then, we say, fine, for each of these podcasts, if we already are subscribed to it, update the UI to reflect that. And then finally, we will go download the image asynchronously in the background once we've formed this podcast. And that's what this completed here is. This self.cj is, we'll rename this, but this is basically now saying finally append our new podcast to the UI and update the UI accordingly. So that works. It works for now. I don't know if this is the right way to do things. It's really one async request spawning 10 async requests. So I think ultimately this should probably be done with a data task publisher and then kind of doing something with that. I'm not totally sure how to do that yet. I think it'll be something here instead of, we'll kind of have like an on receive, and then we'll take whatever publish, like data task pub here, and then we'll do something and update the UI. So I think that's how we should be doing it, but I need a little bit more experience how to figure out how to do that. I'm still learning Combine. So I think that's what we'll do in the future, and that's why this is named CJ, is I was just trying to figure out how to make this work. This is like the last 30 minutes of my day, like really tired, just trying to get something to work. So yeah, this is the search view, and then now this will create a bunch of these list items. We have the subscribe button. This updates our core data stuff. This is mostly untouched. Yeah, so that's the same. We just now have the image now coming from when we download it. Boom, everything just kind of works. We pass in this podcast state, and the state is now we were passing in this podcast, and then based on that podcast, we're doing things in the UI. And this works quite well. Subscription views is basically the same thing. We're just making a list of these podcasts, and I'll go into these list items, and it's quite the same thing. And then after, you can see we have this navigation link going to our episodes view. So now in our episodes view, we have just a very simple list of a podcast episode list. Probably needs to be renamed. And the only thing is when the view loads, we load the episodes from the database. So we go ahead, say we're going to get all the episodes by podcast ID and essentially set them into our state. And then we'll also normally fetch new episodes here. Right now I have it commented out, so I have this extra button, this refresh button. So now I have a refresh button in my navigation bar, so I can manually fetch the new episodes and add them to my database. This is doing a similar thing. The only thing is it's also checking if this existing episode is in our database, then don't add it. So I think this is probably not an ideal thing to do. Probably the better thing to do is have that in our state or something. I'm not sure, but hitting the database this often is going to cause some performance problems in the future. So that definitely needs to be modified. But for now, at least it works, and that's all I need right now. Is I do understand this is going to be a problem, but I'm going to learn the design patterns first and then fix it accordingly. Apply the design pattern once and then kind of refactor things as I go. When things start to become a little bit unwieldy or unperformant, I know, yeah, it's technical debt for sure. But it's okay. This is my 5th day of using Swift. So now in our list item view, it's kind of just some basic stuff about the podcast, taking the podcast, see if it's playing, all this stuff. Yep. And then in our inbox, similarly, we just get all the podcasts. The only thing now is when we actually play, it's kind of broken because we're not quite doing things properly. With this remove stick, tick, start, tick, we're setting up the player multiple times where we should only be setting it up once. So all of these things will need to be changed, or we only should be setting it up once per episode, or like we reset it up, we tear it down and reset it up if a different episode is getting played. So yeah, that's mainly why I have some bugs is in here, because it's just copy and pasted from this initial play view, and this is completely deprecated, and there's all hard-coded values and all this. So yeah, that's pretty much it, I think. Things are working relatively well. I think I learned a lot. I think there's a lot of patterns I still have to learn. So the next week will probably be mostly fixing the rest of the patterns I'm missing, and maybe beginning integration into the main Notes app. Either I will integrate it there or kind of do some inter-process communication and share it across processes. And then all of that will go out to the server. Maybe it will record completely independently of each other to the server. I don't know. I think they should be sharing some kind of context. I don't always want it to go out to the server. So likely there's going to be some common data store. I don't know if this will be one app or separate apps. I haven't decided yet. So these are all things to experiment with. I probably will do both because I can mostly just copy and paste all of this code into the Notes app and see how that works, and also do the sharing across instances. So yeah, I think that's mostly it for today. We do have a lot to go forward with, and once we integrate it, now it's going to be time to work on the back end, and I think I might be using Clojure for the back end. I have not decided that yet either, but it seems like there's some pretty nice libraries, and to be able to extend it dynamically, there's all kinds of things that maybe would be useful. Um, I ideally would like run once, and I can always push updates to it. Um, Also would like it to be able to people to add their own APIs in, kind of a thing. However you want to add handlers in, that would be great. Um, yeah. So this is kind of where we are at. I think there's a lot to go, a lot more to learn. Pretty excited. I think this week mainly I'll be bug fixing in the mornings, hopefully. I think it should be relatively easy. This week was kind of fixing all of the mistakes I made last week and making the code way easier to navigate and update, because it was a real pain to work with before. It's still kind of a pain. Um, but for me, I can understand it in its current state, and I removed a lot of dependencies where I have to update everything everywhere. It still exists, and that's what I'm going to try to abstract away in the future. Yup.